It's Friday. That means it's another Moss Football Friday. Obviously, a crew member short. We gave TJ the week off because the After Dark segment has been incredible lately. If you're not following us at Mike Arana Show on everything but Snapchat, even Threads, my man Vegas Mack in here with me. Look at he's going full Indiana Hoosiers with the shirt choice tonight. What's up, Mac? How you doing, buddy?
Oh man, I'll tell you, it's been an interesting couple of days. That's all I can say. We had a little storm kind of blow through our area here, and had to do something I haven't done in probably, I don't know, 30 years. I had to shovel snow.
Shoveling snow. Nobody got time for that stuff. How did it work?
Oh,
Did you remember your old tricks? Did it take a little while?
it was no problem. I had that whole driveway shoveled out in no time whatsoever. The wife got to work on time. That's all that matters. Wife got to work
That's
on time.
that's the key. And on time and making deliveries happen. We're in the time of the year. It's November now. This is when football gets really, really good. The NFL about the halfway point. We've got the first college football rankings out, which obviously we're going to talk about a lot. And not a whole lot of complaints from my standpoint in the initial rankings. What I will say is, why the hell did we wait so long to do this? I mean, when you see the layout 1 to 12 and how they're doing everything, it's absolutely incredible. And I know you and I were texting back and forth last night during the ranking show, or last night. That's how the week's been. Tuesday night during the ranking show. And it's incredible to see this form now. And again, a lot of people freaking out, overreacting. We knew that was coming, but this is edition one of 6 of these rankings before we get to the actual playoff. But just the fact that we could see 12, Mac, like it was mind blowing, and it gave me a little March Madness vibe. And I think as a whole, as college football, that's what you were looking for.
Absolutely. I mean, that's exactly what I was thinking of. It was like a mini March Madness day. We got to see the layout, like you said. We got to see the teams. We got to scratch our head just a little bit and say, yeah, I can see that. I mean, like you said, I don't think there were any huge surprises in the whole thing. But for me, in my head, what it made me do is I really didn't care who they put. I started looking at those games and going, okay, who do I think could win this game? And if they win this game, look who they play next. And you kind of, I don't know if you did, but I did. I kind of filled out my bracket already just with the teams that were there because I wanted to see, okay, what could these matchups actually
I
be?
scratched a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of fun. It was kind of fun. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I think one of the coolest dynamics about the college football playoff, and we'll get into the nuts and bolts here, but about the layout of this, I think one of the coolest dynamics that I love personally the most is the first round home games for the higher seeds. Like, that's really cool. And based on, as we dive into this, based on the first edition we saw, you've got Boise State at 12, at least now, one of 6, at Ohio State. David versus Goliath. What does that take most of us back to? Ironically, to match your shirt theme, it takes us back to a little bit of Boise State and Oklahoma. Like Boise State at the Horseshoe to play the second ranked team, Ohio State. And we'll get into that here in a second. But the home team matchups, I think, in that first round is the most intriguing thing to me, especially when we break down the matchups, which we will here in a second. That was what caught my attention.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I think that's something that we really didn't think about because we don't even have that with March Madness. Everything's
Right.
at a neutral site for the most part now. So that's a whole different dynamic. That brings a whole another aspect into those games. And again, the other thing, and we've talked about it the last couple of weeks. The one thing that this whole playoff system has done is we've got elimination games. And we've not really had that, maybe a little bit, but we really, truly now have teams that have to win games. It's made the regular season a little more worthwhile. Okay, how many times have we said that in the past, where the regular season might not really matter all that much in college football?
Yeah, and we go through and really this weekend, it's like SEC elimination game weekend. We've got Georgia and Ole Miss. Ole Miss is one of the more dangerous teams from the outside looking in that needs to win out, or at least win out to the point where they get in the SEC title game to have a shot. We've got Bama and LSU, which is a straight up head to head straight elimination game. LSU needs the win. Bama got in, which some people are chirping about already. You know, the Crimson Tide at 11, they right now would match up at Texas, where we saw a great game last year in Texas with Bama and Texas. That would be a first round matchup in Austin. And that's the cool part. But I think this weekend, all the conferences together, the SEC is hey, here's the first rankings. Here we go. You guys have 2 elimination games this weekend. Ole Miss can be eliminated, and the loser of Bama LSU is going to be eliminated. And again, like you just said, now we've got regular season games that actually matter. This weekend's going to be incredible.
It's going to be really fun. And, you know, what more can we ask for with this system that we have? Yeah, it's the first time. Yeah, not everyone's going to be happy, but here's the thing. By the end of when we finally get those 12 teams, it will have played out where it matters the most, and that's on the football field. We're not going to have to guess. We should really know who those 12 teams are when it gets to when we get to that point.
Absolutely. And one of the things I picked up from the first rankings show the other night, ESPN, Greg McElroy, one of the things he said is who you lost to and how that matters. And McElroy said that before the show brought on Ward Manuel, the Michigan AD, the head of the selection chair, the selection chair, if you will, the head of the rankings committee. And it does matter. And there's a couple of teams that it's really going to matter to once we get into the nuts and bolts of it. We've got Texas A&M, who's 14, technically the second team out. SMU, little surprising. They are the first team out. Not necessarily surprising for where they're at, but what we've heard and what we've seen, at least initially in these rankings, Mac, is how you play when you lose to a higher ranked team actually does matter now. The AP poll and the CFP rankings dead friggin' match to each other. So now we're going to get to see some of these teams go, hey, that was a big game. You needed to win it, but you lost it on a last second field goal. That's another dynamic that comes in, I think, is fantastic.
It's going to be interesting to see, again, when you talk about that, how this actually plays out for the future of college football as well. You know, this year was so much about, you know, the realignment and everything, but now people realize, you know, it may not be such a bad thing to go and play a better team and get a loss, if you will. I mean, you don't want a loss, but it may not be the worst thing in the world. We may see a completely different landscape of college football in the next 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, and I think we needed to. I mean, we wanted to, we needed to. Again, to use the March Madness analogy for what college football is doing here with 12. And let's call a spade a spade. I mean, anybody that is watching this knows that we're at 12 now. We're going to get to 18, I think. I think 18 is the next stretch. A lot of people think we're just going to go 12 to 24 because the ratings are going to be ridiculous. The viewership is going to be ridiculous. Everybody's excited about it. I mean, the amount of people that just watched on Tuesday night just to see how the rankings laid out, that's exactly what college football wanted. There's obviously a lot of steps to hit to, but like the incredible dynamic about this, BYU, who we're going to get to them here in a second, they're ranked 9th, but in the college football playoff format, as the authorities come by, because it's a crime that BYU was 9th, BYU is the 4 seed because they are the 4th highest ranked potential conference champion. And Iowa State didn't help anything. I mean, last weekend, you couldn't have picked a more perfect weekend to go topsy-turvy than last weekend, because now we've got a lot of situations where I think this is the greatest thing for college football. All the ball busting we've done on your Arkansas train, your Pitt train, your SMU train. Last weekend you were torn, SMU and Pitt. Like, we've gotten to the point now where we've created interest in November that with a 14 playoff, we wouldn't have normally had. And I love where this is headed. We've got a couple of years of this before we morph it, but no doubt about it, you go 1 through 4 on the rankings: Oregon, Ohio State, Georgia, Miami. I don't know if there's a whole lot of people that would argue that. I know you view your top 12 a lot of the time, especially with the Mac 12, a little bit different than that. But I don't think anybody can argue the ranking of the top 4, even though that's not the seeding of the top 4.
Yeah, I mean, no, I mean, there isn't another team that you could put in one of those slots. I mean, that is, and I said that is rock solid. There's nothing there. And when I went and did mine, Mike, I really only had one difference between what actually came out. And that
you
was
had Arkansas in the top 12, probably.
Yeah, no, it's Pitt. No, I'm just joking. I had Clemson in there. Clemson had been playing really well. And I thought they probably got in there. And we'll talk about it. I just don't see the Alabama thing. I just think I'm not sure. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But that's really the only change. The numbers were a little bit different, but I had 11 of the 12 that they had in there.
You did. You nailed it. And here's the thing, too, is I think the other dynamic that nobody's talked about yet with this is now that we see these rankings, and I mentioned Ole Miss earlier. You know how big I was on Ole Miss at the beginning of the year. I mean, you know how big I was on Ole Miss even before they lost Quinshon Judkins to Ohio State. Like, now we've got teams that are going, okay, here's where we're at. We can win out. And if we at least get to our conference title game, that could change the dynamic. I think that's the other, elementary layer to it is you've got teams that can make that full run and shock the world and get to their title game in their conference that now start to really change this. And the fact that there's 5 more of these rankings to come out, Mac, like that's the impressive thing.
Right. And, one of the things you mentioned at the beginning, did they come out too late? If you're one of these teams, if you're Ole Miss, I don't know how much it would have made a difference, but would you have liked to know a couple of weeks ago that, the position that you're in, like, hey, listen, this is where we are. And now we really need to make sure that, we don't misstep. So it'd be interesting to see. I personally think this is like the perfect time for it to come out. I think before that, there's just, you're still filling things out. We're kind of into the heart of the season now. Maybe a week or two earlier, I wouldn't have minded either. But where they are and where they came out, I'm all right with that, because if you're really in a position like Ole Miss where you can win out, it's out in front of you. Here's your plan. Here's what you need to do, and now you know it for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's the best part of it is like we can go all the way down. Let's go all the way down to 20 in the college football playoff rankings. We've got Colorado, the Buffs. They're in a position where if they win out and they can get to that Big 12 title game, the Buffs can crash the party. And what it does, not only from the Heisman standpoint, as you saw in TJ and I's breakdown of the Heisman, like the top 4 guys in the Heisman, Gabriel, Genty, Travis Hunter, and Cam Ward. You've got those 4 top guys as far as the odds go in the Heisman. All of their teams have a direct path to the playoff. For Colorado, it's a little bit harder. They're going to have to win out. And what that does to help Travis Hunter's Heisman campaign, Boise State in the position that they're in. And we know how the rankings work. If Boise State ends up the 9 AP ranked team, the 9th AP or the 9th ranked team by the College Football Committee, they're going to be the 9 seed. And I love that aspect of this. You could have Boise State at Tennessee. You could have Boise State at Notre Dame, depending on how things go. Notre Dame, can you get in a goddamn conference for F's sake already? Just get in a conference. Like Notre Dame, I think, is another one of those teams that a lot of people have kind of an issue with. They're 10th, they're 7-1, but a lot of people are going, they're 7-1. and they lost at home to Northern Illinois. That's also part of this. And let's give college football the credit that they can, Mac. I mean, what are we doing right now? We're talking about it, and we're talking about it more in November than we typically would, because I don't think anybody would really give a damn at this point in the season last year for number 11 Alabama and number 14 LSU playing. But this year you have to, because it is an elimination game.
Absolutely. Like you said, it's doing what it needs to do. It's generating the interest that college football wants. Not that it needs that, but it's even getting more interest. And, yeah, I mean, these next couple of weeks are going to be very, very interesting. I know I can't wait till the next rankings come out. I want to see how much, if at all, it changes. That's what's going to be big for me. If a team wins or if a team loses or how they play, it's going to be interesting to see how much, if anything, any of those teams change.
Yeah, and this weekend Colorado has Texas Tech. To speak about them, why are we talking about the number 20 team in the country? Well, because this is what it's created. Colorado has Texas Tech. They have Utah. They're at Kansas. They have Oklahoma State. Colorado can put themselves in a position, thanks to Iowa State last weekend, where they can maneuver their way into a Big 12 title game and get back in the race. And those were the things that we were missing before. Number one question for you, anything you saw with the rankings, because there's been a lot of people having a lot of opinions about a lot of things lately, especially the last 72 hours. From a college football standpoint, did you see anything in those rankings? Because you and I haven't talked about this. I know people think because we're doing a show, we can pre-script. We don't do that kind of nonsense, that kind of bullshit here. What was the one thing when you saw the rankings that you were like, hey, I don't know about this?
I think for me, I was surprised that Alabama was there. I thought they were going to be like the first team out. I really did. I thought they were going to be in that 13th spot. I don't know who I would, like I said, I had Clemson. That's where I was leaning towards, because when I did my 13th team was Alabama. That's where I had them. I had Alabama at 13. So for me, that was a little bit of a shock. The Notre Dame thing, like you said, I'm just not sure. You're right. It's the one loss feels so bad, but again, it's so long ago. We talked about this last week, with like LSU. I mean, LSU having that first loss at the beginning of the year against, USC. I mean, but I guess we kind of really need to focus on what they've really done. We need to really look at, so far, here's all of their work. It's not just that one game. That's where I still question Alabama, though. And we can talk about Alabama a lot. I'm not sold. I don't know about Alabama. It's a big question mark in my mind.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is when we look at it and we look at Alabama's schedule and everything, the win against Georgia, and again, to quote Ward Manuel, the Michigan athletic director, that's the head of this whole thing, it's how you play in wins and how you play in losses do matter. And the win against Georgia, even though Georgia almost came back and beat them, is, I think, the only reason why Alabama is still here. When you look forward at Alabama's schedule, they have a really tough contest next week after the LSU game against Mercer. Not really sure how they're going to work out there. Then they play Oklahoma, who missed the memo that, hey, you should start prepping for the SEC. And then they get Auburn. Yes, the Bama-Auburn game, we know random things happen. Weird shit happens in that game. But that's why this is an elimination game. And I think ultimately, again, to go back to the point, this is what college football wanted. If Alabama loses this game, they're not getting in. If LSU wins this game, now when you look at LSU's kind of got a little bit of a driver's seat there. For me, there were two things that I was like, I can't really say, Mac, that I was pissed about it. It was just kind of eye-opening to me. The disrespect for BYU, and I get it. BYU is not going to wow you. They're not going to impress you. They're going to muck up games a lot. But BYU is really damn good. Now, this weekend, they have a tough, I don't care what you say about Utah. That's a BYU Utah game. That's a rivalry game. You've got high ranked BYU on the road in Utah. That's a big deal. The other thing for me was Indiana. And the Indiana thing is the most popular argument everywhere in the world right now. We've talked about it. Indiana's remaining schedule: Michigan, Ohio State, Purdue. Indiana's last 3 games, those 3 games we just said, that gives them a top 15 remaining schedule on the season. Indiana's really damn good, and I don't understand why people don't get that yet.
Yeah, I know. I mean, like you said, they've proven that they can do it. That is as balanced a football team as I've seen in a long time. Both sides of the ball, they do the right things. Again, this is what I'm saying. What if they drop that game to Ohio State? Does that move them all the way out? I mean, that's going to be interesting to see. Does that drop them all the way out?
How did they drop it, though, is a factor. How did they lose that game?
You know, exactly. I mean, if they lose, like you said, by a field goal at the end of the game, is that going to matter? You know, it'll be interesting to see what the committee actually does with now a team like Indiana that has 1 loss. Because I don't think they lose to Michigan or Purdue, but I think Ohio State, it's a possibility.
Yeah, and we've seen from the rankings, Ohio State is the number 2 team. Indiana is the 8 team. So again, based on what Ward Manuel said the other night, Indiana could play that game against Ohio State and they could lose on the last second field goal. That should keep them in. But where Indiana's at, I'm not comfortable with. And I hate it because I love that team. Indiana and BYU have bought more beers in my personal house and more Friday night pizzas than any 2 teams in the country right now. And I'm not saying that because they've been padding.
They're so much fun to watch.
Right. And I'm not saying it because they're padding my pockets. They're fun to watch. We're all like, oh, Curtis Rourke's out. You know, what's going to happen now? And they just proceeded to go in a week where everybody thought Washington was going to go on the road to Indiana and give them a challenge. And Indiana said, get your Pac-12 wannabe team out of here.
Hold my beer, right? Hold my beer.
Exactly. You know, so as we move forward, and it's going to be interesting to see how it works. I don't have a problem really with anything. I thought BYU's positioning and Indiana's positioning. So 8-9, but in the bracket form, it turns into 8-4. That creates some issues. So we've mentioned it. We've talked about it. You know, we've got the elimination game. So let's start with the first and earliest and most obvious one, Georgia and Ole Miss. I mean, you look at that, you know how high I was on Ole Miss. A lot of us thought Georgia looked a little off. But again, and I think this is where Georgia is 3 behind Ohio State because they struggled a little bit against Kentucky. They didn't look great. They didn't even look great last week against Florida. No. But here they are. If Ole Miss can beat Georgia, Georgia doesn't fall out, I don't think, of the whole thing. They move way to the back. Ole Miss probably doesn't get in on next week's rankings. But this is a big-time game. And to use an old cliche, for Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, if not now, then when? And that's where we're at in the Georgia-Ole Miss game.
So, first off, does it seem like Georgia has a bye every other week? It just feels like they do. It just seems like they have a bye every other week. For me, I looked at this game. I hate to put everything on the quarterbacks, but for me, I look at this game. It's about the quarterbacks, and they seem like they're going in opposite directions. Jackson Dart's been absolutely fantastic the last couple of weeks. 826 yards. He's had like 7 touchdowns in the last couple of games. They look like they've hit that stride like they had at the beginning of the year. You talked about it. This was a team at the beginning of the year that looked really, really good. They got high up in my rankings as well. I think I had them 2nd or 3rd at one point. Then all of a sudden, like you said, offensively, it seemed like it fell apart a little bit. But the last couple of weeks, they've really hit their stride. This looks like a Lane Kiffin masterpiece. It's like you know, every year he's going to come up with one gem. Is this the week that he does it? Like he's kind of building towards that. On the other side, you know, Carson Beck, he struggled. The three big games he's played this year, Texas, Florida, and Alabama, he's had 9 interceptions. Hasn't looked good in those games. So that's what worries me. Ole Miss can put some pressure on the quarterback. That's one of the things that they can do. They have a good front, and they can put some pressure on the quarterback. I'm worried about this game if I'm Georgia. I really am. For me, I just think it's this is a game that Ole Miss, they know they have to have. Man, I think they can pull an upset this week.
I definitely think so as well. And it's also a game, to bring this in a rando weird circle of SEC life for people not familiar with it. It's also a game I think a lot of Florida Gator fans are paying attention to. Because, again, if not now, then when, with Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to get pro Lane Kiffin on this show. We love Lane Kiffin. We love the Lane train. Jackson Dart, 3,210 yards, still leads the country in passing, 21 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. The problem for the Rebels, and this has kind of been a repeat problem for the Rebels, is they shot themselves in the foot. And I think Booger McFarland brought this up the other night on the selection show as well. The loss to LSU. Now, granted, here's another thing we'll get into in a minute. Playing LSU at night, strange things happen in Death Valley at night. And then the loss to Kentucky by Ole Miss. That's the other thing. Like, when you look at the rest of what Ole Miss has done, you know, and Ole Miss finishing out Georgia, obviously, this week. Then they play a Florida team. Could be a preview of not a coaching switch, but and then Mississippi State, obviously the Egg Bowl. We all know about that right around Thanksgiving this year on November 29th, which I believe is Black Friday without a calendar in front of me. But the point being, Ole Miss has got to put up or shut up, and they're going to bring their best. And the game's in Oxford. Georgia, the weird thing about Georgia is everybody's like, don't sleep on Georgia. They're still the biggest factor. I know Oregon is this. And you're not wrong in saying that. But you also got an Ole Miss team that's playing at home against Georgia that's going, hey, we know what it is. We saw the rankings. We went out. We should be in there. I think that's what makes this great. And hopefully it transitions by conference. And we'll get into that a little bit here as we move forward. But I really like the spot. And I really think of all the teams that were on the outside looking in, and I love Garrett Nussmeier, and I love LSU, and we're going to talk about them here in a second. But I think Ole Miss is the most dangerous team on the outside that can go, hey, we're here. And I don't think anybody in this realm of possibilities here wants to play a game at Oxford in the first round of the college football playoff.
And like you said, you know, you talked about the losses. I mean, Kentucky, we know, can play some good defense. They've been banged up a little bit, not as well. And there's no shame in losing to an LSU team as well. This is a really, really good team. And like I said, for me, I like Ole Miss in this game. I really do, Mike. I just think the way that they're playing, Georgia has played well. They haven't played great. They have a little bit of that swagger. It's starting to come back, but I watched them a little bit last week, and you know, I kind of joke with you. I told you last week. I said I thought Florida would keep that thing pretty close, and they did. But I think this game is very early on. The first quarter is going to be really, really key. I think for me, can Georgia get Ole Miss off the field? 3 and out, and kind of, I think that would frustrate them. If Ole Miss has some success, I think that's where we see they have a chance for the upset.
I went with Ole Miss. I got them at plus 114 on Wednesday. They were still plus 114, obviously creeped down a little bit now. And I agree with you on the same side as we finish this one up. I think that we're seeing some things. You know, Georgia's got their, hey, we're number 3. We're right behind Ohio State and Oregon, the 2 Big Ten teams. So we've got Big Ten supremacy in this rankings over the SEC, which is a different thing. I like Ole Miss at home at plus money. I think it's going to be a battle. I think you're going to see the best that you can possibly see out of Ole Miss. We stay in the conference to go to what is a no-doubter elimination game, number 11, Alabama, and number 15, LSU, if we want to go from the college football playoff rankings. So we've got the third team out in LSU, and we've got the second to last team in Alabama. No doubt it's an elimination game. But from Alabama's standpoint, when you go into this game on the road at night in Death Valley against Brian Kelly's LSU Tigers, family with fake accents and everything, Brian Kelly, say what you want about him. His tenure at LSU, he is undefeated in night games, I believe. Don't quote me on this, 13-0 at home under the lights. This is a bad spot for Alabama. And again, at the beginning of the year when we did all our conference previews, we said, hey, this notion that Alabama is going to fall off the face of the earth with Kalen DeBoer is false. It's fake. It's whatever. He's a good football coach. That being said, when I look at these two teams straight across, and then I add the Death Valley environment, and I've been big on Garrett Nussmeier, not very big on Brian Kelly, and he's given me a lot of reasons not to be. But in this spot, I don't think it's a good spot for the Tide.
Man, oh man. You talk about both these teams. There's no lifeline left. This is it.
Nope.
It's their season is out there. For me, for Alabama, I think the most shocking thing is just like trust. Like you every time we watch an Alabama team, you figure offensively they're going to be able to put up big numbers. They've struggled at times putting up big numbers this year. Their offense isn't I know there's always a comparison. I know it's not an exciting, but their offense isn't what it is, and neither is their defense. This is a team that struggled on defense. I mean, for me, it's hard because I fall in love, and we all do, with the name. We fall in love with Alabama. We just know that when Alabama's out there, it doesn't really matter. I had a friend who worked at one of the major football. He worked at Arizona, and I asked him. I said, "What's the toughest place to play?" And he said, without a doubt, it was LSU, and he didn't even blink an eye. He said that is the hardest place to play a college football game, and they play during the day. They didn't even play at night. I mean, that place just looks crazy at nighttime. But for me, this is a game. I don't really think either offense is really great in this game. So then, for me, I think which team can force more turnovers, because both these quarterbacks are going to make mistakes. We know that. And so which defense is going to be a little more opportunistic is how I see this game playing out. Here's the thing I scratch my head about Alabama. They're 2-2 in their last 4 games. That's not Alabama football. It's really not. I'm having a hard time. My head says Alabama because it's Alabama, but honestly, my heart says can't go against 13-0. You can't go against LSU at night. I just think this is a game that LSU wins. That's what my heart's saying, Mike.
I'm not going to make the pick on this because this will be the Saturday morning game, but here's what I will say as far as how we go. Like, Garrett Nussmeier, to me, and go ahead and DM us and do whatever you want, Garrett Nussmeier is the best quarterback in the SEC. When you look at progressions, reads, and I know that sounds crazy from me, from a guy who loved Jackson Dart at the beginning of the year, and I still do love Jackson Dart. But you've got Kyron Lacey. You've got, and let's just stop with Kyron Lacey. The dude's been so clutch all year for Kyron Lacey. Like the overtime touchdown catch against Ole Miss, 3 massive third down catches when they played LSU in a game they should have won. I mean, LSU, we talk about going back before we go forward. LSU wins that game at Texas A&M. Where do we think LSU is in this poll? Definitely ahead of 11 where Alabama was. And that's the thing. It's like the defense is just as good as ever. You know, they had everybody. You mentioned it. We talked about them. Everybody kind of dumped on them at the beginning of the year. You know, new defensive coordinator, new adjustments, a lot of transfers. They're as good as anyone defensively. And again, that nighttime thing in Death Valley is a big deal. But to me, when you look at the whole scheme of things and you look at numbers and clutch throws and being able to throw back shoulders and everything else, Nussmeier is a guy in the SEC, especially, who has not gotten any attention. Everybody's talking about Quinn Ewers. Everybody's talking about Jalen Milroe. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be talking about these guys. Jackson Dart, obviously Diego Pavia over at Vanderbilt has done some amazing things. Carson Beck. But Garrett Nussmeier doesn't get the hype for as good as he is. Does he make mistakes? Yes, every college quarterback makes mistakes. But I think top to bottom, if you said, hey, best quarterback in the SEC, I'd have a hard time not saying Garrett Nussmeier. Again, under the lights, we see how it works. Definitely elimination game, college football playoff. You sorcery masters, wizards. Speaking of the college football playoff, let's go to Salt Lake City. And a tough place traditionally for a lot of people to play, but the number 9 ranked and disrespected BYU Cougars, a cash printing machine all year. And Jake Retzloff, shout out. He was in the crowd the other night at BYU's basketball home opener. I was watching that one. Couldn't quite get the score to 150. They should have subbed in Jake Retzloff. That's a story for a different day. This BYU team, again, flashy? No. Pretty? No. Can they win in a lot of different ways? Yes, they can. And I'm very interested to see this game because now that BYU is in the position they're in, and we see that the conference committee doesn't have a whole lot of respect for the Big 12 as a whole. No. BYU is kind of the flag carrier in this game in a rivalry game.
So here's what I put for BYU. This game is not about a conference game. It's not about a rivalry. This is about a chance for them to win a national championship. Let's just be honest. That's what this is all about. For Utah, what they've got to get a couple more wins to get bowl eligible. That's what they're hanging on. I just don't see it in this game. I know it's a big battle. I know the whole state probably shuts down for this game. I get that. But for me, I just don't see Utah being able to offensively do anything against BYU. We talked about it. BYU isn't flashy, but for somehow they get turnovers. They get them when they need them. They're not flashy, but they get sacks and stops. They don't allow teams to go up and down the field. And Utah just can't. Utah is that engine that they're trying, but they just can't. They're offensively, they're just not a really good football team right now. And that plays right into the hands of BYU. I'm going to be honest with you, Mike. I don't think this one is close. I think BYU wins this one, and I think if there's a slam dunk, I think this is a slam dunk. I think they win this one double digits. I think they win by – I wouldn't be surprised if they won by 20.
Yeah, the interesting thing about this game is it's still around a 3.5 point spread in favor of BYU, over under about 40.5. I don't care about the over under in this game. You mentioned it, and I think this is a thing. And I said this, I think, a couple weeks ago when we first talked about BYU really on the show. I mean, I've been on BYU pretty much for the whole year. Defensively, what BYU does to you defensively, and Harrison Taggart and Isaiah Glasker, two of the best middle linebacker combo tandems, I think, in college football right now. These two guys are all over the field. And we know about Darius Lassiter and Chase Roberts on the offensive side. But BYU can beat you ugly. BYU can beat you pretty. They can do it both ways. And I know Arizona is not really a litmus test because we had high expectations for Arizona with all the guys they were bringing back with Conley and Fafita and obviously Mack that we've talked about a lot. But the way BYU handled that game, and they just manhandled him. And I saw this spread come out, and I jumped on this instantly last Saturday night. The way I saw it open, I don't know if this was the official open, but I jumped on it because BYU was a 3.5-point favorite, and rivalry game be gone. I just don't see this game being any close. And again, it goes back to Taggart and Glasgow for the Cougars on the defensive side of the ball. That's the thing with BYU. So TJ will have this in the After Dark on Saturday on our channels at Mike Arana Show. You and I are in agreement here, no doubt about it. I think this game is going to be a whitewash because Utah, the team that we all thought was going to dominate this new version of the Big 12, and here's BYU just going, hey, we're here. Yo, we're here. And that's the cool thing about BYU is I think BYU, the way they play, speaking about a potential college football playoff, and right now they would host the game. And I've heard a lot of comments, and I can't wait to get your take on this. I've heard a lot of people comment on, hey, if you get to that 5 seed, which right now would be Ohio State, and you beat Boise State, which would be the 5-12 as of right now, you get to go to the lowest ranked conference champion, that's BYU. I don't know if that's exactly what you want to ask for, because if that game in Provo is at night under the lights and BYU is already on a bye, that's a dangerous place to play at night.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny. At the beginning of the year, if we looked at this game, Utah BYU, we would have circled it because we knew it was going to be a pretty big game. But it was going to be a pretty big game for who? Utah, right? Not for BYU. That's what we all thought. So it's kind of funny. Like you said, that's why we play the games. That's why we go out there and do it. But, yeah, the last place you want to be is on a Saturday night. The weather, is going to be cold. It's going to be miserable. That's not going to be a fun place for Ohio State, Boise State, any state, not a state. That's just not a place you want to be.
Well, and there's a lot of different teams that could end up in that spot. Most likely it looks like Ohio State, but Ohio State, again, has to play Indiana, and I'm not passing Indiana off. When you look at the rest of BYU's schedule, and my thoughts on going to games in person anymore, it's not really my jam. I don't like it. What I will tell you is November 23rd, BYU is at Arizona State. And that game, because after the Utah game for BYU, they have Kansas at home, and that's a night game in Provo in the middle of November. And then they finish with a night game at home against god-awful Houston. That game at Arizona State, November 23rd, we're talking right around Thanksgiving, could have a lot to do with the entire landscape of the college football playoff. And BYU knows where they're at. We were talking about Ole Miss just a minute ago. Ole Miss, if they can win out, they can put themselves in the position. BYU now goes, we got to keep winning to keep ourselves in the position, because if we do fall short in the Big 12 title game, but we get there undefeated, we should still be in the mix. And I don't necessarily know if the committee sees that. Again, TJ After Dark, about 2:30 West Coast time on Saturday. He'll give you his thoughts. Our thoughts, BYU in a landslide in this game. Mack, final word there.
Like I said, I love all those rivalry games. I always say, if you're playing a game and it has a title or you're playing it for a trophy, it's going to be fun and it's important. But listen, for BYU, they just got to keep doing what they're doing. Like you said, that ASU game, I know it's their eyes are on that. But listen, do what you need to do in this game. You'll be in good shape.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, what the college football playoff has done has just created that, and that's why we can't wait to see. We can't wait for next Tuesday. Let's shift to the professional side of things. The NFL, we're getting into the height of it. We're going to focus today, I should say. Well, it's tonight for some of you, on the NFC playoff picture before we dive into this weekend's games. Detroit, they go into Green Bay. The score wasn't indicative of the dominance of your and TJ's Detroit Lions at Lambeau. And the Lions right now, if we broke it down before we get into the nuts and bolts, and I'll give you the first word here, Detroit would have a bye. My Washington Commanders, who I said would make the playoffs at the beginning of the year, they would be the 2 seed, hosting the 7 seed Green Bay Packers. You've also got Atlanta as the 3 seed, hosting the Eagles as the 6. Arizona would win the NFC West, and they would host the Minnesota Vikings. We've got a wide open, extremely fluid, because another team we'll talk about when we get to the feature games of this weekend, the 49ers are getting healthy. They're on the outside looking in. The Rams, who knows what the hell's going on there. The NFC playoff picture as it sits right now, I don't think any of us are surprised Detroit's the 1 in a bye. I know everybody is surprised Washington is the 2 seed.
And I'll tell you what, there's one team in there that Detroit scares me. There's no doubt about that. Them aside. But there's another team that scares me. And I know you kind of have a love-hate relationship with them, but that's the Eagles. And I'm telling you, that team is starting. They're starting to look really, really good. And I knew I was going to get that reaction from you, but I'm just saying that team's starting to scare me a little bit.
You saw the power pyramid on Wednesday, and I said it leading into it, even on the Sunday spread. The Eagles are starting to click. They're starting to get some things figured out. There is no way in effing hell that game should have been as close as it was in Philly. Kelly Green, reverse hurdle Saquon. That game should have not been close. Nick Sirianni's ego is the downfall of the Eagles. Nick Sirianni's Eagles is the downfall of the ego. However you want to put it. 4 of the dumbest play calls I've ever seen in my life. And he can talk in the press conference about having big balls and whatever. That's, I think, the problem with the Eagles and why I don't think the Eagles are really there. They lost Jason Kelsey and his leadership. They've turned over the roster. They've struggled. When I watch the Eagles play, I still don't see a simpatico kind of head coach to quarterback relationship. And I'm telling you, Nick Sirianni would have had the worst week of his head coaching life if that game, which was very close to ending up on the bad side for him, they would have ran his ass out of his ego. Is why I don't have confidence in the Eagles.
I hear what you're saying, but here's what I'll tell you what. I don't know that it's going to matter anyway, because I don't know that anybody's going to be able to beat Detroit. That right now is just a total machine. We'll get into that in a little bit, but I don't think it's going to matter. I think Detroit's coming out of that conference.
Shocking breaking news. I'm going to tell you right now. I'm going to right on record. It is November 8th at give or take. I can't see the clock. It's November 8th, and we're at about 5 o'clock West Coast time, give or take. San Francisco wins the West, or wins the NFC. Here's why. Detroit is really good. Detroit is beyond very good. Detroit likely at this point, unless a miracle friggin' happens, San Francisco is going to have to go to Detroit. Here's the difference. A healthy San Francisco, a healthy Detroit. San Francisco can get into a track meet with the Lions. They can, especially in normal weather conditions. If anybody beats the Lions in the NFC, it's San Francisco. Washington, I think, is going to be like the Lions were last year. So depending on how things shake out, I think the Lions, or the Commanders, if you will, they get to either the second round or they're the team in the NFC Championship game. That's probably the highest part of the ceiling. I'm not saying I'd be shocked if they won the NFC. Washington, and I said this a couple weeks ago, Washington to me this year has the Houston Texans mojo from last year. You got a really good young quarterback. You've got veterans. You've got a new coach, a new everything. I can see Washington getting to that point. More likely, I see Washington out in the second round. I think a healthy San Francisco in Detroit can get into a track meet with the Lions. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to beat the Lions, but there's only one team in the NFC that is built to compete with the Lions and everything that they can do, assuming both teams are healthy, and it's the 49ers. But the Lions right now, you're going to have to beat them in Detroit. That's the bottom line, as Stone Cold said so, if you will. But
There you go.
that's exactly what it is. Like Detroit right now, unless something catastrophic happens, has home field throughout the NFC. And that's dangerous.
And I can see what you're saying, but San Francisco still has to figure it out, and you know that.
They do.
And I mean, yeah, we keep saying injuries, but we're kind of getting to the halfway point of the year. McCaffrey, I know, is supposed to come back, and it's going to take him a couple of weeks to kind of get going, but we still got to see it. They're in a. It's kind of funny. I mean, they're at 500, but they're still in a really good position to win that division. They're in really good shape. They really are. They're going to be. That whole division, they're all within one game anyway. So it's not that they're not gonna. It's not that they're far from making the playoffs, but they still got to do it. That team is still trying to figure things out. So We'll have to wait and see. But I agree. You're right. If there is a team that could do it, if they're healthy, that is definitely a team that could give them a run for the money.
Yeah, and when I look at the rest of the NFC playoff picture, the Commanders at 2, Packers at 7, Falcons at 3, Eagles at 6, Arizona at 4, Minnesota at 5. I'm not surprised with what the Cardinals are doing. I mean, I said it in the preseason videos. Like, if you sleep on this year's Cardinals team, you're going to get got. And the Cardinals have got a couple of people enough to put them in the position that they're in. Minnesota, some people wondering if the Darnold magic is wearing out. They did what they had to do on Sunday night. A little bit sluggish in the first half. They did their thing. Philadelphia, I just said my piece there. I mean, we talked about it, as you saw in the power pyramid on Wednesday. The one thing I said about Atlanta and Kirk Cousins is the more and more comfortable he looks on both of his feet, throwing off the back foot in the pocket, more and more dangerous Atlanta is. Green Bay, they looked really good till last week. I have also said this. I'm not convinced Jordan Love is as good as everybody thinks Jordan Love is. The Packers next year, again, the thing we have to remember about the Packers is all of their skill players, with the exception of Josh Jacobs, all their skill players are young. They're still developing. Romeo Doubs has had some, whatever issues this year, whether this, that, and the other thing. They sat him out for a game. He's a guy here. When I look at this setup going forward from a 49er standpoint, we're talking who's going to win the NFC. You look at Kyle Shanahan's record, 2021, before the bye, 2-3. After the bye, 8-4, lost in the championship game. 2022, 4-4, 9-0 after the bye, lost in the championship game. 2023, 5-3, 7-2 after the bye, lost in the Super Bowl. So at this point of the year, everybody that doesn't see San Francisco as a factor, you haven't paid a lot of attention over the last 4 years. And if there is a team, again, that can go into Ford Field in a track meet with the Lions, that can go shot for shot, it's the Niners. There's a long way to go. And who knows? Christian McCaffrey is supposed to play, and we'll get to that game here in a second on Sunday. He's supposed to play. It's going to take him a while, but it's the rest of the thing. But everybody has injuries at this point. Right. And let's start in our game previews here on an interesting game that involves both conferences this weekend. You've got the Pittsburgh Steelers, 2 weeks under Russell Wilson. Offense has actually looking like Arthur Smith actually has something up here that goes, oh, I can do things downfield. And then you've got the Commanders, hot, on fire, a lot of momentum behind that team. Jaden Daniels, Offensive Rookie of the Year, that's already been awarded. You guys just don't know about it yet. That, to me, of all the games this weekend, Steelers Commanders is no doubt my favorite game. It's in the district. It's going to be a fun one. Steelers Commanders, what do you think?
Well, from a Steelers standpoint, when you face a quarterback like Jaden Daniels, it's tough because of what he does. He runs, he throws. Do the Steelers play defense against somebody like that? Yeah, guess what? Lamar, twice a year, every year, right? So from that standpoint, it's not going to be a huge surprise what he does. I mean, I think saying that Daniels and Lamar, that's a pretty good comp for them. So they're used to that. My biggest thing is still this offense with the Steelers. There's still some questions about it. Yeah, they look good. It's going to be interesting what they can see. This is a much better team that they're playing. Okay, defensively, this is a much better team. My other question, and nothing against the Commanders, but their schedule's been a little on the soft side. Okay, I want to see what they can do against a really top-notch defense. And this, let's be honest, the Steelers have one of the best defenses in the NFL. They really, truly do. Got a little bit better. They made a pretty good trade over the last couple days ago. This is going to be, I think, a really good matchup. I think this is going to be your typical Steelers game where they're not. I don't think there's going to be a lot of points scored in this game. I can see this being like an 18-17, a 2017 kind of a game, something along that line. But I think this is a great, to use a phrase, a great litmus test for both these teams to see what they can do against really good competition.
Well, yeah, and I agree with you. You got the Steelers at 3-1 on the road, the Commanders at 4-0 at home this season. 2.5-point spread in favor of the Commanders. It looks like some sites down to 2, maybe 1.5, over under at 44.5. Your general thought process there with Steelers Commanders would be to go, hey, probably on the underside, not even talking about the weather, but I think you're right. And that's the one thing is the Steelers defense is used to playing against Lamar Jackson. And it's not that we're comparing Jaden and Lamar and they're the same guy, because they're not. Jaden's got a long way to go. He does. But that is a similar comp there. And I think with the Commanders coming back home in the position that they're in against, probably the toughest team that they've played this year. I mean, if we really want to look, I mean, yes, they played the Ravens and lost to them, but outside of that game, when you look at the rest of their schedule, yes, they and the Buccaneers, but we're not really sure what the Bucs are right now because they're down Godwin, they're down Mike Evans. Another thing that's going to be a factor for the Bucs this weekend that we'll talk about in the game against San Francisco. But yes, they haven't really played anything. And when you go forward for the Commanders from here, then they get the Eagles on short rest. And then they got the 10-day window and the Cowboys. But then they got the Titans, the Saints, the Eagles again. Here's a sneaky good game. And a lot of people have looked at the Niners-Lions game in the NFC playoff picture, the second to last week of the season. That same weekend, the Niners-Lions game is on Monday. That same weekend, you've got Washington at home against the Atlanta Falcons. And, of course, that's a TBD game. I am imploring the NFL right now. I'm not looking at anything else on the schedule. Give me Falcons. Give me Commanders on Saturday night.
There you go.
Right after Christmas. That's a game we want to see in primetime, because for the NFC playoff picture, that's a big deal. To focus back to this weekend, I do agree with you. I think that the Daniels-Lamar comp for Pittsburgh being ready for it is good. Where I think this battle is in this game is the other way. It's the Pittsburgh offense against the Washington defense. The Washington defense, we know what their weakness is. It's the secondary. That's the only part that Adam Peters and the crew hasn't been able to address yet, is the backside of the Washington defense. We know what you know more than anybody. The one thing that we're starting to see with Russell Wilson on the Pittsburgh offense is let's move the ball way downfield. I think that's where this game really ends up getting decided. I'm going with the Commanders at home, not because I picked them to make the playoffs. I think this is going to be a battle. I think the Washington defense against the Pittsburgh offense is where this game is decided.
Yeah, for the Commanders defensively, they lead the league in pressures. So it's going to be interesting to see. Russell's not as mobile as he once was. So can that Steelers kind of interesting offensive line handle the pressure of the Commanders? If they can, and they can give Russ time, Steelers can win this game because I think they're going to be able to control the Commanders' offense a little bit.
Yeah, and that's going to be a good one there. So let's move on. We'll go over to the AFC before we hit the rest of the NFC side to follow the, NFC playoff preview, if you will. Broncos and Chiefs. On paper, you say it out loud, doesn't sound like a damn good game at all. The Chiefs, we know they're still number one in the power pyramid, and they should be because they got 15. That being said, and before I go any farther, Brett Veach might be the Bob Myers of sports executives now, because you think back to the Golden State Warriors when they were on the run. Bob Myers knew how to plug and play and get this guy on a 1 year, get this guy on 1 year. DeAndre Hopkins, they just keep bringing back Kareem Hunt. Brett Veach needs a statue in Kansas City before Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes do, because the coolest thing about the Chiefs to me, and you're talking, again, this is somebody who's lost 2 Super Bowls from a fan standpoint, 2 Super Bowls where his team had the Chiefs down and lost 2 Super Bowls. Brett Veach has done so much to build that Kansas City team. You saw it Monday night with the DeAndre Hopkins factor, but it's not the big names. It's the bringing back guys and reintegrating them. And this game on paper doesn't sound like a good game. That being said, the Denver defense, I don't think anybody, they're getting credit. But Denver's defense, and I think this spot, especially after Denver's defense got run all over by the Ravens, Denver's defense is good. Kansas City, short week, if you want to call it that. I don't buy much into the you played Monday, you play Sunday thing. This is going to be, I think, a better game than a lot of people realize. That being said, Bo Nix has to figure out how to beat Steve Spagnuolo.
Right. And I know last week TJ was really, really high on the Broncos. And I said, the one thing about playing against Baltimore, when you don't play against Lamar, it's tough. He's good. You can't make that up in practice. And the Broncos found that out. But this is a Chiefs team. Again, every week we look at it and you go, oh man, they're not playing great football. They're just doing the things that they need to do. And I think the best picture from Monday night was Baker Mayfield, the coin toss. As soon as he lost the coin toss, he was like, he knew the game was over. It was over. I mean, there was nothing he could do. That's just the Chiefs. It's what they are right now. Again, you hit it right on the head. Putting people in places where you just, DeAndre Hopkins looks like he's been there for 12 years. Hunt's been there for 12 years on and off, right? Hasn't he? He just keeps coming back every couple of years. They just find a way to get it done. And that's what you want for your football team. But we also know this. They're going to stumble. At some point, they're going to stumble. Is this the week that the stumble kind of happens? Again, the one thing I talked about is, Sean Payton loves these kind of games. He's looking for really kind of that really big signature win. He really needs that for that young Broncos team. Is this the week that he can get it? It'd be interesting to see. Defensively, they're going to have to be better. We know that. For me, it just feels like they're still a little – the Broncos are a year away. They feel like they're a year away. I think going to Kansas City is still a big task. I think Kansas City wins this game. I would take the Broncos. It's about 8.5 points, 8.5 points. I would take the Broncos in the points, but I think Kansas City finds a way to win.
Well, and you know what? Let me put an end to this, because those of you that follow multiple sport channels, we appreciate that you follow ours. One thing you've heard from a lot of people is going, Kansas City has Buffalo next week, and that's a number 1 versus number 2. That could flip-flop. it's the Kansas City Chiefs. It's Andy Reid. It's Patrick Mahomes. It's Brett Veach. It's Chris Jones. It's Travis Kelce. They are not looking past the Broncos. So the people that are telling you that they're looking past the Broncos, stop watching them. The Chiefs don't look past anybody. They don't have to, and they're not. I've seen it as low as 7.5. I've seen a couple places at 8.5. I think this thing's going to settle right about the 7.5 number for the Chiefs. And I get it. Again, it's Bo Nix at Arrowhead for the first time against Steve Spagnuolo's defense. And it's a big game for the Broncos because right now the Broncos are holding, and we'll dive more with the three of us next week into the AFC picture. But the Broncos are in that last spot just ahead of the Colts, who are the next team behind them. At the beginning of the year, if you would have told anybody that the AFC West was the division that was going to get 3 playoff teams in, everybody would have said you were high. Right now, if the season were to end literally today, the Chargers, the Broncos, and the Chiefs would all be in the playoffs. So I'm interested and I'm excited to see that game. One game I'm actually very interested and excited to see, and people are going to think I'm crazy because we talked about him. We talked about firing the effing GM last week. The Eagles and the Cowboys. Cooper Rush under center for the Cowboys with Dak out. The Eagles coming in, Sirianni's ego. All that being said, the Eagles are 7-point favorites. It's dipped a little. It's climbed a little. I'm interested to see, and TJ and I have talked about this a lot. I'm going to literally stalk this line until a minute before kickoff. I'm very interested to see because the thought process for everybody right now is Dallas is a disaster. Micah Parsons might play, might not. That's going to probably go down to the end here. But everybody expects Dallas to just get their ass kicked because Dak's out and the Eagles are coming to town. And I'm telling you, I have this feeling Nick Sirianni and the way he is the ultimate downfall of the Eagles. I don't think this is a whitewash for the Eagles on Sunday. You probably don't agree with that.
Man, I think the Cowboys are taking on water so fast.
You just said that last week.
I know. And I mean, and I just look, 3 of their next 4 games after this, they have the Texans, the Commanders, the Giants, and Cincinnati. If they don't win this game against the Eagles, they may get the game against the Giants. Maybe. I'm not even sure of that. But, oh my gosh. I mean, I just can't see it. I keep looking at it. I know Cooper Rush is going to play, and he played against the Eagles a couple of years ago, so there's a little bit of that factor. At least they're kind of used to seeing him. What can Dallas do to win this game? They struggle on offense with Dak. Are you telling me that Cooper is going to be an upgrade over Dak? I just don't see it. I mean,
I don't necessarily trust the Cowboys here. It's as much as I don't trust. If this game is close and Sirianni pulls out some bullshit 2-point conversion attempt early in the game that doesn't matter, that means nothing from it. I think Dallas is probably more into this game than people realize. Do I think they are enough to bet it? No, because here is the one problem that will, no matter if Dak's there or not, with Dak, they couldn't run the damn ball. They can't run the damn ball now. That's the problem with the Cowboys is they can't run the ball. They're extremely one-dimensional. CeeDee Lamb, he's got the AC joint, the shoulder deal. Yeah, Philly's probably going to win this game, but I don't know if I'm just going to automatically go, yeah, Philly in a romp, because I don't trust Nick Sirianni.
Yeah, but I still think Dallas, Philadelphia, he knows how much this game means, not only to Philadelphia, but he knows how much this game means to Dallas. For the most part, I don't think Dallas is going anywhere this year, but this really just puts an end to it for them. I just don't see where there's any reason Philadelphia doesn't win this game. And I don't see how they don't win it in a big fashion. I mean, Barkley should be able to run all over these guys, whether he's going forwards or backwards.
I'm gonna make this prediction right now, a week ahead of time. So we just talked about the Commanders Steelers. I think that's the game of the week. For me, that's the game of the weekend. The Sunday night game should have been the game of the weekend, but the Texans aren't coming in with full guns blazing. Thursday night football, Eagles at Commanders. So Eagles go to Dallas. They play Dallas. I think it's going to be a tough game. I'm not pulling a TJ calling the Broncos money line over the Ravens. Sorry, TJ, I had to get you. What I am saying is I think the Eagles win, but it's a typical NFC East, Dallas, Philadelphia thing. I think that's more of a game for longer than it should be. On Thursday night on Prime Video, you've got the Commanders and you've got the Eagles, and that is in Philadelphia. But I wonder, because of Sirianni's ego, is he bypassing and looking to Thursday night? Because I know Dan Quinn ain't letting the Commanders do that. Dallas, yeah, you said it. They're taking on water. It is what it is. But I don't think this is as much of a whitewash as far as people think the game should be as it's going to be. Like, am I wrong on Sirianni? I mean, maybe I'm just being a hater. Tell me here. I mean, what are we at with the Eagles? Maybe I'm a hater.
I mean, I understand what you're saying. It does. It seems like he gets in the way too often. I mean, we've already seen it numerous times already this year. I mean, you would hope that you look at that and go, all right, let me just listen. If I just get out of the way, I might be able to get to the NFC Championship. I might be able to get to the Super Bowl. I got a great running back. I got a pretty good offense. I got an okay defense. I might be able to get to the Super Bowl. Just stay out of the way. Just stay out of the way, Coach. Stay out of the way.
That's the problem.
They got those. They got to get an extra get back coach. They get the get back coach. Get him off the line. They need to take his headphones off so he can't do anything stupid at the end of the game. Just take him off. Let the team play, Coach. Let the team play.
I'm telling you, Eagles fans, and I know some of you Eagles fans watching this right now will agree with me. He's a Jersey Shore reject cast member, and it's going to cost the Eagles. And I know I don't think I'm wrong here. I think there's some Eagles fans that'll defend him because he is Philly, and I don't hate Philly, the sports city. We have talked so many times at nauseum about how much I love Citizens Bank Park in October. I'm not a Philly hater. Nick Sirianni, the dude I'm telling you, it's going to cost you before it comes down to the end.
Just get out of the way, Coach. Just get out of the way.
Yeah, easier said than done. San Francisco off a bye week and Tampa Bay coming off of Monday Night Football. We know the story with the Bucs. We know the Bucs and in the power pyramid, high up and high rolling for a long time. The Bucs, I think, are a good football team. Once they get Mike Evans back, they're an even better football team. Obviously, losing Chris Godwin, your Batman and Robin there, that's going to affect them. The Bucs have started to run the football better, as something that I was talking about earlier this year. You guys got to run the football. I think one thing that nobody is paying attention to, the Lions lost to the Bucs in Detroit. That's how good this Tampa Bay team is. Everybody's going to go San Francisco coming off the bye, Christian McCaffrey coming back. This is not a cakewalk on either side of this. It's a desperate Bucs team that needs a win to keep pace with the Falcons. It's a 49er team that, based on even numbers we talked about earlier, is going, okay, typically this is when we turn it on. Probably not the preferable way to do it, but now we know we're at the bulk of the schedule. For the 49ers, it's the Bucs, it's the Seahawks, it's the Packers, it's the Bills over their next four. For the Bucs, they've got a bye week, and they're going to get Mike Evans back. Obviously not Chris Godwin. They've started to run the ball. This is an interesting game on both sides of the football. I think San Francisco healthy. I don't think anybody would argue the better team here, if you will. But I don't think this is as easy walk in the park as everybody thinks either, just like the Philly Dallas game.
No, and I mean this is a tough team. This Tampa Bay team is tough, and they've taken on the persona of Baker Mayfield. I love Baker Mayfield. I mean, I really do. I mean, you can say what you want about him, but he's a tough dude. He really is. I mean, he doesn't give an inch. I mean, he honestly feels like he could be an offensive lineman. He really has that kind of mentality. I love watching him play, and here's the thing, like you said, he's doing this. I mean, he almost went in. Let's think about this. He almost went into Kansas City and beat the Chiefs, and he doesn't have his top 2 receivers, right? I mean,
there were 9.5-point dogs on Monday night, and honest, stop. The people that are like, Bull should have went for 2 at the end of regulation. Stop that. No. That team was already undermanned, and they got it to that point. Yes, the coin toss was a thing. Make a stop on defense. Let's not shit on Todd Bowles for not going for 2 there. Because if he goes for 2 and he misses it, everybody's like, what the hell are you doing? Tampa Bay is a good football team. I had them as high as 4 in the power pyramid. And I still think they're going to get back there. They need a win, but for Tampa Bay, it's probably going to kind of have to come after the bye week if you're looking at it straight up. But I don't think this is a walk in the park for the Niners.
No, but here's the one thing I will say about San Francisco. I mean, they have been so up and down this year. Again, we're not going to talk about the injuries. We just know they've got to play better. That's the bottom line.
Every team's injured. Yeah.
And here's the thing. At some point, you know this. The 49ers are going to go off. They're absolutely going to go off. If they get McCaffrey back, is this the week that it happens? You got. I know you're not big on the short week, but still, I mean, that was a tough game on Monday night. Is this the week that the 49ers finally get it together and they go, all right, like you said, second half of the year, off the bye, we know what we do. It's game time now, boys. Let's kind of get it together. Is this the week the 49ers finally put it together? But I agree with you. This Tampa Bay team is a lot better than we think. When they get everybody back, they get into playoffs. This is not a team that I want to play in the playoffs. And here's the thing. They don't have to be at home. Like you said, they went into Detroit and beat Detroit. This is a team that takes their game on the road very well.
Yeah, and a loss obviously would be 4 in a row. They lost by 10 to the Ravens Monday Night Football at home. They lost by 5 to the Falcons. Tough game there. They lost Monday night. So the game against the Falcons, they should have won, could have won. The game against the Chiefs, they had a chance to win as well. The first game against the Falcons, they lost in overtime. So that being said, and again, every team is dealing with injuries, but they are the same team that went into Detroit and beat them. They lose to the 49ers. It's 4 in a row. It puts them at 4-6. They're still going to be second in the NFC South. Here's the good news for you, Tampa fans. When you come back from the bye week, if you lose to the 49ers, whether you win or lose to the Niners this week, doesn't necessarily matter. Obviously, a win is the best thing you can do. We're not stupid. But after the bye week, at the Giants, at the Panthers, versus the Raiders, at the Chargers, tough game, at the Cowboys, that might not even be when Dak's back. And to be honest, you went into Detroit and beat the Lions. You can go into Dallas and beat the Cowboys. Then they have another game against the Panthers and another game against the Saints. So they're in a good position, Tampa is going forward. For the 49ers, you absolutely have to win this game because then you have Seattle, then you have Green Bay, then you have Buffalo. And everybody this year that's been like, I wouldn't sleep on the 49ers because we know what they do after Kyle Shanahan's bye weeks. The thing I think most people don't talk about when it comes to the Niners is yes, Christian McCaffrey, the most dynamic Swiss Army knife in football, does a lot of things for what the 49ers offense can do. Dre Greenlaw is a couple of weeks farther out from coming back. Talanoa Hufanga is a couple weeks farther out from coming back. Those two guys, and I'm not saying McCaffrey's impact doesn't mean anything. You'd be an idiot if you said that. But Dre Greenlaw opposite Fred Warner makes the 49ers defense the 49ers defense.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Niners cover the spread here, but I think it's going to be a battle to cover the spread. Looks like it's going to be a touchdown. Your pick before we move on.
I think San Francisco wins this game. I think this is going to be a week that they kind of open things up. Tampa Bay, again, kind of on that downside, like you said. They gave up a lot of yards in the last couple of weeks as well. Defensively, they haven't been as good. I think this is a week that San Francisco finds their footing a little bit. I think they win this game. I think they actually I'd even give the points, the 5.5 or 5 points. I'd give it up. I think San Francisco wins this game.
Yeah, it's an interesting line, and I think the McCaffrey, whether he's in or out on Sunday, makes a big difference. If they announce him in, I think it goes up more to a touchdown, maybe over a touchdown. Tampa's going to be in a good spot going forward. They're going to have to stack them, but getting Mike Evans back, one of the most underrated wide receivers in NFL history, and the schedule that the Bucs have after that. Sunday Night Football should have been a great game. I think it still will be a good game and possibly a great game because it's in Houston. Houston's had a little bit of extended rest. The Lions coming off of the massive, couple of weeks stretch here, the massive run that they've been on. Now, I'm not saying that I expect the Lions fall down. I think the Houston crowd gets Houston in. We know Houston's going to be better when they get Nico Collins back, but it's right now, and the reason that I dropped Houston all the way down to 10th in the power pyramid is Houston's got offensive line issues. They're not protecting CJ Stroud. He's not able to get comfortable and throw, so his numbers look down. Obviously, not having who, for my money, this year was on pace to no doubt be the best wide receiver in the NFL, Nico Collins, the way he started. They're going to get him back. But like even the other night, losing to the Jets, they had 7 or 8 opportunities undermanned and having line issues and everything else. They still could have and should have won that game. They didn't. Now they get the Lions coming in off a hot streak. I like the Texans at home in this game to keep it close. I don't know if I like the Texans enough to bet them to beat the Lions in the spot.
Yeah, they gave up 8 sacks to the Jets last week. I mean, I don't care who you are. You can't win when your quarterback's on his back. That's for sure. Again, the Lions have just kind of rolled. They're so much fun to watch. This really is a fun team to watch. But kind of a wink, wink, nod, nod. Could this be a preview of the big game, the Super Bowl? Could it be? Wink, wink, nod, nod.
Next week, we're about to make our mid-season predictions. But if you're leaning that way already, that's interesting. I like Houston at plus 160 on the money line here. I don't necessarily. I'm not saying that I think Houston's going to win this game. I'm watching the money line here. The spread is a little over a field goal. I think maybe it might settle by the time we kick off Sunday at -2.5. Right now, as I sit right here, the best consensus line, Detroit -3.5. At some point, we think that Detroit maybe stumbles a little bit. I mean, it's natural over the course of a season. And the crowd in Houston will be rocking. They're wearing their red fire. I can't remember the exact name. They're going red on red. It's going to be charged in there. I mean, the Texans still 6-3. They're not a bad football team. I think that's another thing. I think we've projected the Lions to this shelf that nobody can get to. Some people don't even think the Chiefs can get to because they've been dominant. Everything levels out at some point. I think this is going to be a better game than people think it's going to be.
And remember, here's the other thing. We're talking about offenses and offense, but these two defenses are 2 of the top 10 defenses in the league. So that's something to think about as well. So, I think the over is like at 49.5. You might want to be thinking maybe playing the under in this one because you have 2 teams that can play some pretty good defense.
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be an interesting game. And again, to focus back before we get to our best bets of the weekend here, English is easy for you. The Texans, the Lions, they have the Texans, then they have the Jags, then they have the Colts. Like it gets, easier after this one. But eventually, then they've got the Bears, they've got the Packers, they've got the Bills, which that one I can't wait to see. But
right.
at some point, Detroit's got to hiccup a little bit.
Right.
D'Amico Ryans, the head coach of the Texans, familiar with the 49ers system, familiar with that whole get up in San Francisco. I'm very interested to see the chess match between two of my favorite coaches in the NFL this weekend, both D'Amico Ryans and Applebee's Dan Campbell here. I'm going to lean towards the Texans side a little bit, but Detroit's on that one hell of a roll. Let's get to our best bets so we can get out and let everybody get their football weekend started. I am going to start with mine, Mack, and a team that we've talked about a lot. I've got a two-legger again. Last weekend, the Seahawks battled all the way until the end of overtime for me. Oregon handled their business for me. So I'm going to go back to the Oregon trade. Oregon's got Maryland. They're favored by 24.5. I locked that in right away. I think Oregon could literally, without Tez Johnson, for a few weeks, maybe a month. Oregon's covering 24.5. The NFL side that makes it juicy for me, Arizona. The Cardinals are at home. They're playing the New York Jets. Aaron Rodgers and the New York Jets. Everybody's all high on the Jets because they're in second place again in the division. This Arizona team is playing with some fire. They're playing with some passion. They're in first place. They can see the horizon there. The 3-6 Jets and the 5-4 Cardinals. You would have never said that at the beginning of the year. I like the way that Arizona can pound the ball. I like their creativity. James Conner a little banged up, but James Conner's always banged up because he runs like an animal. I think the Cardinals' defense obviously is under pressure here a little bit, but the home environment in Arizona, I'm telling you, Arizona is if your team's in first place, we're all about you. If your team's in second place, not so much. That place is going to be ridiculous right down the street from me. And I like the Cardinals on the money line at home against Jets. Cardinals money line at home against Jets. Oregon to cover 25 against Maryland. That's my two-teamer. Bet you 100. Win a couple bucks. Let's just call it
anything on the roof being open, hail,
right.
Anything like that,
Between Chase Field and the Cardinals Stadium, if it rains, if it hails, one of them works to close. The other one takes hours to close. The other one takes 45 minutes to close. I don't give a shit. I got the Cardinals to beat the Jets at home on Sunday.
Sounds like the Cardinals need a weatherman is what they need. All right, here you go.
Right up the road. I got the Stone out in front. Stone missing. Then it's too windy. Tornado, whatever. Best bet of the weekend. Let's go.
I'm staying on campus this week.
No,
UCLA, big win last week against Nebraska, right? Absolutely. Man, they're on an absolute roll. No, I don't think so. They're playing Iowa this week. Iowa scored 40 points in 3 of their last 4 games. I'm taking Iowa minus the 6.5 points. But wait, I'm not done. I'm not done because I got to redeem myself from that awful pick last week. I'm taking Boston College on the money line against Syracuse. That's right. Syracuse got themselves a big win. We know what happens. You win a big game. You don't play well the next week. BC's coming off a bye. BC on the money line. But wait, I'm still not done, Mike.
You're going 3-teamer.
This one's going to shock you. Are you ready? I'm going Jacoby Jones, UCF. Over 46.5 yards, receiving yards against ASU. He's done it the last 2 weeks easily. Put it down, baby. That's what I'm talking about. Vegas Mack's come to play this week.
Vegas Mack on his 3-teamer college play. You got mine. Oregon to cover 24.5. The Arizona Cardinals on the money line, maybe part of the Sunday spread. I got to redeem myself. 1-4 last week. The spread's been good. For Vegas Mack, for TJ that'll be with us next week, for all of you football fans everywhere, this is the greatest time of the year. Give thanks to what we have. Mack, me, we're out.